Well, there are a series of rules or best practices that have been evolving over the years. And the first rule is, thou shalt not lie. You will not pretend to be a human.
Welcome to Your Intended Message, the perfect place for leaders and promising professionals who want to convey the intended message for greater success. Every week, we interview experts who address the challenges and best practices to deliver your message effectively. That might be one-to-one, one-to-few, or one-to-many. And perhaps the most important conversation, one-to-self. I'm your host, George Torok. My guest today is James Burchill. Here's 3 facts that I think you should know about James. 1, he was trained as a stuntman. Yes, he's been shot, set on fire, fallen off buildings, hit by cars, and crashed motorcycles, and he's still whole and healthy. 2, he is a certified marketing, automation, technology, and productivity coach and helps business automate their growth. And 3, he is a best-selling author and course creator with over 32,000 students in 162 countries. James Burchill, welcome to Your Intended Message.
Very nice to be here, George. Thank you for inviting me.
Delighted to be talking with you, and I know we're going to explore the conversations that we might have with prospects to close deals and gain more business, and how to do that, to automate that so that one can scale the business and be more productive in the marketing and sales side. One of the tools that you use to automate that is the chat bot, which now is a chat bot. Could that be considered AI?
Yes and no. Artificial intelligence is sort of a discipline of software programming, and at its center, a chatbot, which has been around since the early 1960s, is a glorified system of software that's designed to communicate with a human so that we don't have to. And the AI component came along later, and it allows you to create a more authentic kind of conversation so that the computer can actually engage in small talk. That's usually the big clue. If you can have a small talk conversation, there's a good chance there's an AI engine in back of it.
So the AI might drive small talk, but what about a customer query where the customer wants to contact you and find out what are the options? How can you help me? Have you got it in this color? What's the price? Those are questions that chat box can probably answer better.
Yes. So one of the most common applications for this sort of software is what we would call tier 1 customer service, just like you were sort of suggesting there. And the way that these pieces of software can understand those conversations is this thing called natural language processing, which is part of the AI. But there's also very simplistic rules-based logic that can be used to trigger and respond accordingly, just simply looking for the words. If you see or find the word help, for instance, in the phrase, that they're asking for help, most likely, or, if they use other sorts of trigger things. And that's really where it gets interesting, because you can create simple sort of rules-based arguments, or you can create complex, well, they get into natural language processing, and that's, again, sort of circles back around to the AI. So depending on the kind of questions you're going to get asked, you might use the more complicated software components, or you might not need it. And the reality is, in the hands of a skilled conversational designer, you actually don't need AI, because you can create most of it just simply using basic what we would call tree diagrams, where the information branches and flows based on certain key phrases and certain keywords.
So I can see, for example, ordering off a menu. Let's use a restaurant example. So the chat box might say, and would you like an aperitif? What would be your choice of aperitif? And so the chat box in that case might lead the individual, the person, through a series of choices. That's one way to do it. And what about where the person makes a query and the word help isn't in there? How does the chat box handle that?
That's a really good question. And again, you sort of have to look at each scenario differently, and you have to map it out differently. I mean, there's, without getting overly technical, because I don't want to bore your viewers, there's a whole raft of data analysis techniques that you use to infer the intention from those phrases. Sometimes you look for key phrases. Sometimes you look for, there's this thing called clustering, where you look for proximity, you look for speed. If if you're able to remember what was spoken about before, and then something comes after, you can infer from that. So you can get into some fairly advanced. The reality is it doesn't generally need to be that clever, because most of the sorts of things you would give a person in a chatbot the opportunity to respond using buttons or images, and they're driven usually by the user. You don't typically expect the bot to sort of just sit there with a blank, what do you want to know kind of thing. It would typically be, as I say, menu driven or choice driven. When you get into what we call off script, free form conversations, that's a whole other design issue and challenge, and they're loads of fun to create. I mean, if you think about what we do from a business perspective, ultimately what we're doing in business is quite straightforward: answering typical frequently asked questions, addressing some pretty common sorts of problems, and moving the conversation along. Because the intended message of a conversation, especially when you're dealing with a bot, is to try and understand, well, no pun intended, what is your intended message? That is the whole point of a chatbot. They're trying to understand what that is and then address it in the most efficient, natural way possible.
Now, I noticed when I visited your website and the chat box came up, and I thought I'd play with it, and it wasn't. Of course, I was playing just to test to see what it would recognize. But what I did notice is that when it came back and said, it didn't recognize the question or didn't know what you're trying to say, would you like to speak to James now? So there was a button there that I could have pushed, to reach you directly. So if I was a frustrated prospect, I had that out. It was, it was like when you call on the phone and you get the message, that if you keep hitting 0, you'll get through to the operator. So that option was presented there. That's probably a pretty good option to have at any point when you've got automation, right?
Oh, absolutely, George. I mean, it's incredibly frustrating for a user to run into technology that's used as a barrier. See, I grew up, I started coding in the 70s, and I always believed that technology was an enabling platform. I didn't think it was supposed to be something users shield. You're not supposed to hide behind it. You're supposed to use it to amplify your message. You're supposed to use it to enable your message, to provide services in a way that perhaps can't be scaled quite the same using an organic solution. And by organic, I mean us. So the last thing you ever want to experience on a website, when it should be an enabling technology that's supposed to make the experience and the conversation more enjoyable, is to run into something that basically says, I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that. I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that. And then it just dies on you. And it's to your point, it's like using the phone and not being able to get a live operator. That is infuriating. And then that emotion is attached to your brand. So good luck recovering from that one.
During the pandemic, where people feel disconnected, is it likely that they might be offended by encountering a chat box? And if so, how do you design the chat to overcome that? Come on, I want to just talk to a person.
Well, there are a series of rules or best practices that have been evolving over the years. And the first rule is, thou shalt not lie. You will not pretend to be a human, right? If you do, you are going to get outed at some point, because it becomes pretty clear. Humans are really good at judging when they're dealing with humans. It may be not initially, but it doesn't take too much, and you don't need any real skills or training to get a sense that you're being, played with by technology. So usually one of the first things a bot will do is it will announce that it's a bot. Plus, there's an added benefit to this, George, and that is that studies have shown that if a person realizes they're dealing with a bot, their guard and their stress levels drop in most cases. They don't feel like they're going to be overly manipulated. And they also, and this is huge, they feel like they're in control because they are. Whereas when they're dealing with a real live person, an awful lot of people often have told me, and you'll find this data online, that they feel that they could be manipulated by a salesperson. They feel like salespeople have some kind of dark power where they can make them do stuff. And this isn't the same with technology. So when it turns around and goes, "Hello, my name is Jimbot. I'm James's digital assistant," you immediately go, "Oh, okay, I'm dealing with a piece of software." So now first off, you can go away whenever. You're not going to offend anybody. You're not likely to have some human in the background puppeteering your choices. And it is it's been shown actually to create, because of these things, and there's a bunch of other reasons, that engagement factor is much, much higher, and satisfaction, as long as you design the experience properly, and that whole conversational design and how you go about that is key. But assuming you do these things properly, it's a very, very viable solution. More so, in fact, you raised the fact about the pandemic, is that one of the most popular bots, or series of bots right now, are therapy bots.
Therapy.
Yes, therapy bots.
Where you can go and feel better talking to the bot?
Yes, quite literally. They're like automated, perhaps I shouldn't call them this, but I can't think of the right word right now. Automated shrinks. Yeah. So you tell me about your problems, that kind of thing. And it really, people have been finding them very, very therapeutic, given this sort of sense of disconnectedness. In fact, some people prefer to talk to them rather than a real person, again, because they feel it's more private. I mean, I think that's perhaps a strange choice, because you're dealing with a piece of software, and everything you do and everything you say can be recorded and digitized. So it's odd in that regard. But yes, the studies are showing that people are responding very favorably, and it's actually working very well. And those, by the way, have become very much AI enabled. So you can have some very interesting conversations. Ironically, that was the very first piece of software I actually wrote when I started learning to program in the 70s. I actually wrote artificial intelligence using a very old AI kind of logic. I wrote something that was an artificial friend, because we moved around a lot as I was a kid. So as sad as this sounds, I actually wrote myself a friend, and it was a therapist of sorts.
And I suppose when you think about it, it's no more strange than a person who talks to their pet or their plants, just because they need to have a conversation. And in this case, they actually get some feedback from the bot that might pose another question, or might offer them some ideas that the dog's not going to offer.
It's kind of funny. When you're writing, I remember, way back when I was doing this initially, when I was a kid, but it's actually very easy to create, even without using AI, the impression of an intelligent software program. I mean, just for fun, we could say something like, it knows your name. So it'd be, "Hello, George, how was your day?" And you write something. And now let's assume I don't know how to process that phrase. I can turn around and go, "Well, that was interesting." There are all these generic phrases which are factually accurate and true, that on the surface, they look like they're related to the previous. It's a magic trick in lots of cases, but we don't care, because we enjoy the experience. It's really quite fun, actually. I mean, I'm not suggesting that we use it for nefarious or dark means, but when you can create something that is helpful and therapeutic, or even just fun to sort of complain at safely, it's helpful,
Oh, that's interesting. So for those people who need to vent about whatever happened that day, here's a companion they can vent to who's not going to get angry back at them.
Actually, no, as I was talking about it, I was thinking to myself, man, it might be fun to write. Just a sort of a chat bot that you can moan to, safely. And at the end of the conversation, it's like everything you said and everything you did just disappears into the ether. It's like, okay, you feel better, because you really can't. You really got to be careful about who you complain to these days.
Now, at what point might a business or even a nonprofit consider the use of some type of automated conversational chat box?
Usually it's when well, let me back up a sec and let me ask you a question, actually. Do you believe that all conversations, and I will use that term initially, do you think all conversations are created equal?
Oh, for sure not.
Right. And because they're not all created equal, and that kind of applies to leads as well, or any part of that relationship building. I mean, the difference between a stranger and a friend is shared stories and information. So if you look at this idea that when two people, whether it be a person or a company, connect for the very first time, there's a sort of a disparity in information. One side knows more about something than the other. And if this was two people getting to know each other, that would be the conversational paradigm. And then as information flows backwards and forwards, and conversations are turn-based, but at least they are in the Western world, each person or each party takes it in turn to exchange information, either commenting on or adding more, building up, taking down, or even just passing acknowledgement backwards and forwards as the information flow continues. And then at some point, when enough information is exchanged, the relationship dynamic starts to ratchet up until, if this was two people getting to know, and by the way, it's exactly the same for dating, is when you get to a certain point, the scale of trust tips. And now you're into a point where you believe that person, know that person, trust that person, and they've moved from stranger to acquaintance to maybe associate to eventually friend. And of course, if we're talking dating, it could eventually become, lover and so on and so forth. But it's all about conversation. And it's all about the fact that there's information being passed around. Now, to take it right the way back to your question, when would they use this? They would use this when they were in an environment where too many conversations needed to be processed beyond the realms or ability of a single individual, because all conversations are not created equal. And if we use this as a business example, then from a marketing and communications perspective, good business practice tells us that if you're looking to do sales and marketing, typically you'll meet somebody, a suspect or a prospect, and it will be somewhere between 5 and 8 times that you'll need to have a conversation with that person, either face-to-face, over the phone, email, letter, whatever. There are 5 to 8 touch points which move the conversation along until either they leave or they maybe buy whatever it is you're selling or do whatever it is you're asking. So that transactional tip will occur. Now, the problem is that at the beginning, you don't know whether that person is going to evaluate out into a profitable relationship. Now, again, we're talking business because you don't want to be using this sort of rather mercenary approach when you're dealing with your friends, or maybe you do, I don't know. I was reading about something called a friendectomy earlier today, which I thought was hysterical. The surgical removal of the certain number of people in your life. But so the idea is just that you don't know the value of the conversation, and you can't afford to treat every single conversation, at least at the beginning, like they're all worth the same. So you use automation to help you weed out the tire kickers and the looky-loos and the time wasters. And you do this respectfully, you do this intelligently, you don't use it as a barrier, as I said earlier. And ultimately, George, it's about intelligently respecting the conversation, so that the thing that is most valuable to us as humans is our time, because it's essentially our life, and we're not getting any more of it, and it's running out regardless. We can't pause it, we can't stop it, we can't save it. And when you're dealing with other individuals as part of your job, I think one of the most valuable things you can give anybody is your attention. Not too much different from what's going on in this show right now. And I think the fact that you're paying attention to me and vice versa, and your viewers are paying attention to hopefully both of us. That is a great, I think that is a great honor. And I believe that because it's time-based and it's, you know, tied to our very finite, very short lives, that we need to respect that properly. And I use technology for that reason and that reason alone, so that you can focus what little time we do have on the people that merit it. And again, that's a business judgment. I'm not saying that's like a personal thing. I mean, everybody is special little snowflakes. It's just from a business perspective, not everybody's a profitable snowflake or a profitable connection.
So is it fair to say that if a business receives a lot of queries with similar type questions, and that's early in the process and in the connection process, and therefore, because it's early, the value of the relationship isn't high yet, and the trust is we're just starting to establish something. We don't have a strong trust. So it's okay to automate those conversations, because it's probably about just providing information to the prospect.
Yeah, it's very early on. That level of that scenario you described is essentially transactional. It's not relational, right? In the beginning, it's I have a problem. I've shortlisted a bunch of individuals, or I've called a company. It's transactional in that you want to try and get the resolution. Now, that's not to say that a human doesn't need to come into the equation at some point, but in the beginning, sometimes the people don't even have a really good understanding of what their problem is. They just know they have a problem. And so, you know, they'll start asking questions, and systems like that, especially, again, that sort of circles back nicely to the concept of tier one customer support person. Those are your frontline individuals in companies, and using automated software, specifically chatbots, or any automated system, really. It doesn't even have to be a chatbot. It could just be an intelligent FAQ system, or an interactive voice response system, an IVR. Speaking of which, you know, those are, we've all got kind of smartphones, and we've got things like Alexa, or which is on Amazon. These are all voice operated chatbots. They are voice interactive only right now, but those are chatbots, and you can have conversations with them, and they are designed to, you know, have that conversation, question response, challenge response, that sort of thing. And they're getting cleverer and cleverer all the time, and they're also listening constantly. But hey, you know, a bit big brotherish, but you know.
James, when you help your clients make use of a chat box, how do you decide or learn what are the right conversations to put in there? Do you have a standard? Well, first we always ask this, you know, what do you want today? How can we help you today? Or is it a little bit more?
It's customized depending on what they're trying to do, because the reason, let me back that up a sec. Just because they're conversational doesn't mean that they're designed to hold and have all conversations. They're designed usually to fulfill a particular need. So if typically you're asked 3 or 4 different things, what you'll do is you'll create a conversational flow, or what we would call a conversational experience, around each of those individual things. It's not possible without getting into the realm of AI and then the other things to create this sort of universal conversation. And again, I'm about technology providing service to us. And as much as I sort of joke about using a chatbot maybe as a therapy bot, I'd still think if you just want to have a good old-fashioned conversation, this is way better than bots tend to be transactional. I look at them as well, they're called robots, right? Chatter robots was the original term. So chatting robots, chatbots, they are designed to fulfill a purpose, and beyond that can be codified, right?
And when a client comes to you, before you decide if you can help them,
mm-hmm.
and if some type of automated conversational tool is the answer, what 1 or 2 questions would you ask the client up front?
Right. Well, that's a good question, George. And the sorts of things that we look for when we're when we're sort of doing this, it's actually quite an informal approach. You know, if you and I were just sitting down and we were looking for opportunities to streamline your business process or your overall workflow, I might just say something as simple as, so what kind of things do you do repeatedly? You know, and we could, you know, be very specific about it and say, okay, let's talk about production, let's talk about marketing, let's talk about finance. You know, throughout my career, we've, you know, myself and my teams over the years, we've automated pretty much every business function in some regard. But messaging and marketing and communication, they're the ones that tend to be the most commonly requested, because it is the one area that tends to have the fastest and most impactful effect on the bottom line, because it impacts sales, impacts marketing. And what I would probably say then, if somebody said to me, well, you know, we'd like to look at automating this, I would say, well, talk to me about your process. Tell me, you know, how do you find leads? How do you have a conversation? What do you say? Can I talk to your best salespeople? I will map what's known as the conversational domain. I will, in a very informal way, I will listen. So most time we'll record it, then we'll transcribe it, and then we'll actually dissect the words and start to come up with a map. And this map will give me an idea of what's occurring, and then I will look to create a model and digitization opportunities, and I'll start to see patterns. You see repeating patterns in the chaos. Most people don't see it, but if you've been trained in data science and analysis and some of the things that, you know, we go through and we do what we do, we look into the chaos and we see order and we see systems. And that's really what, you know, you're looking for, is the opportunity to make a person's day a lot less chaotic. You know, we joke about, people say, oh, I can play more golf. Okay, if that's your thing. I say, you can do more of whatever it is you're the most valuable asset to do. Because repeating yourself, I hate repeating myself. Really drives me round the twist, you know, which of course is funny, because as a consultant in the beginning of my career, you'd go into all these companies and the names would change, the environments would change, maybe the vertical or the industry would change, but it was always the same problems. It's like the names would change to protect the incompetent, but that was it. It was always the same over and over and over, which is why I started to create systems and I started to teach.
James, have you seen companies who've implemented a chat bot and it went wrong? It didn't work. And what mistakes did they make?
I don't have firsthand knowledge or firsthand of being involved in any product or projects that did that, but I have seen cautionary tales, especially when it comes to artificial intelligence, because AI, you know, it's such a sort of an evolving platform. I think one of the bots was developed by Microsoft a year or two ago, or maybe 3 or 4 years. It wasn't that long ago, and I think it was called Tay. And they, in their infinite wisdom, they created the algorithm to learn based on content and conversations, which in and of itself, as a data scientist, I look at that and I go, hey, that makes sense. So what did they feed it? So they created this pure entity capable of having all of these really intelligent conversations. And they said, let's give it the human experience. Let's point it at something so it can slurp up gigabytes, terabytes even of information and evolve a consciousness of its own. Not that that's really what happened, but that was the dream. So they gave it social media. In less than 24 hours, this sweet, intelligent conversational bot turned into a racist Nazi, and they had to shut it down. It became offensive and mean and cruel, and it went from language which was helpful and supportive to very, very hurtful, hateful, dark, and destructive. And they've seen this in other scenarios where AI systems are given free rein. And one of the other interesting scientific experiments I saw was where they took 2 AI systems and they basically put them into a fake world and let them exist and see how they interact with each other. When resources were plentiful, they were collaborative. When resources were not, they became destructive. They went like that, straight into war mode. It's incredible what computers, when emotion and humanity is stripped out of it, I mean, I know I'm probably not making a sort of a winning argument for AI, but that's scientific, cutting edge, weird AI. This isn't the stuff that goes on in bots. That's not even close to it. But yes, I've seen some demonstrations where, what's the expression? Don't let your reach exceed your grasp. Anyway, it's something along those lines. And yeah, I've seen a few projects where lofty goals have fallen flat. But on a more human and smaller scale, again, not personally involved, usually they fail when you lose sight of the one thing that I believe is most important. And that is the human. It's not there for the purpose, oh, look, isn't this cool? It's like, it's meant to help us. It's meant to help solve a problem in our day. That's it. You know, and those that failed usually forgot they were created to solve some human's problem.
James, for those who might like to learn more about how they might automate their marketing system, I believe you have a resource for them.
I do. I am a huge fan of this whole concept, and it's a very big subject. You can learn a little bit, you can learn a lot, and it's not really something that you flip a switch. This is more of a journey for life. There's this constant ability to teach and learn. And so I've been collecting and putting things together, and I've created a training course, online video-based training course, which I've made freely available. It's called leavenoleadbehind.com. And the reason for this name, Leave No Lead Behind, is because that actually is the simplest answer to a business dilemma. In most cases, businesses come to me and they say, we want more business, or, you know, we want to create more sales, we want more profits. And I say, well, simply do this. Never, ever, ever not follow up. And they're like, what? And I say, leave no lead behind. Always follow up with everybody continuously until they buy or they bail, you know, or they sail or they scoot, you know, you get something happens. So you must follow up continuously. Now, the problem with that, of course, is it takes a lot of effort. Ergo, all these systems, and that's why that training program exists, to show the basic pieces, and you can use as little or as much of it as you like.
My guest today is James Burchill, reminding you to leave no lead behind.
If you like what you heard, remember to like, comment, and share this podcast. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.